Today's case is all about emotions, money, and doing what we have to do for a better life. I'm Tony Tremble. Enjoy the case. Death across the river. The sun shined brightly above them. He was admiring the line that joined her ankle with her hip. Her legs were made with a chisel and had the exact shade of tan to create the perfect picture. She could be a model for bathing suits, Jared Nurse thought without saying. She must have been a bomb in her time, admitted immediately after. Marcia Jensen was 55, 30 years older than Jared. They were in two very different stages of their journey. For Jared, it was all about learning and trying to stay afloat. For Marcia, it was an unstoppable desire, an honest mistake. The result was obvious from the get-go. Both knew when their paths crossed that there was no other destiny but disaster. Even that wasn't enough to stop them from pursuing a mirage until the last consequence. Marcia Jensen and Jared Nurse met by chance. They were meant to, if you believe in such a thing, but seen from afar, it was purely a coincidence. The same old tale, a matter of timing and place. It was a waiter at the right table for her to leave her phone number with the manager, her friend. The first time they did it was in the storage room of the restaurant. They had no clue about it, but that was just the beginning of the end. Their fateful fortune would unravel soon and would change everyone's life forever. That was 5 months before the afternoon by the pool at the house Marcia was struggling not to have taken away. Everything was calm. The soft breeze moved her hair and gave him little goosebumps that multiplied all over his skin. They were lying under the sun, and he just couldn't believe how lucky he was. On the other side of the city, across the river, his friends were jumping into the ocean, carrying their surfboards, laughing and listening to loud music. They didn't ask about their friend Jared anymore. He'd changed. He'd changed them for his new girlfriend. That same night, after dinner, Marcia pulled the cork on the most expensive wine in the house. It was something Jared didn't even know existed. No bottle of wine could possibly cost what a car does. Well, that wine was that expensive and meant for a special occasion. Marcia asked Jared if he wanted to participate in her business as a partner. She gave him the perfect discourse about how and why his money would be duplicated. More than that, triplicated. Jared had just sold his bike, the one he worked the most on, and was saving to buy the off-road ATV he always wanted. It was something like 10 grand short, but had 25 grand in his pocket. He put his signature on the dotted line, but didn't even read the first paragraph. He was as naive as it gets. The following weeks went by, and the only thing that changed between them was the level of control she had over him. Marcia was very proud of being a self-made entrepreneur. She was tenacious and merciless in the business world. Relationships were different for her. She had just had 2 failed attempts at love. Her failed marriages were the opposite of what she experienced as a child. Her parents and grandparents had been faithful to the altar vows throughout their lives. Death did them apart. Although her parents loved each other, her father was always trying to bring her mother down, diminishing systematically everything she did. Her mother had gone into the claws of depression, and she remembered those years as living hell in her own house. Yet she was old enough to understand that her mom was enduring violence from her husband. Her dad had eroded the very foundations where her mom's self-esteem was based on one hurting comment at a time. Her mother committed suicide before even considering leaving her husband. When he was done with her mother, he turned to his only daughter. What he didn't know was that she was aware of his modus operandi. He wasn't going to fall for the same thing her mom did. She swore to herself there and then that no man was going to diminish her in any way. Her dad had also passed away, but from a terminal disease just 2 years after his wife. By the time Jared entered her life, she wasn't speaking to either of her ex-husbands, but both divorces had been very expensive money-wise, also emotionally. Both times, what seemed like the ideal man turned into the living image of her dad, and she just couldn't stand it. No person could be as brutal as Marcia when she felt someone was undermining her. She was a cougar, but not in the street-smart meaning of the term. She was a feline, aggressive, and potentially lethal. But force wasn't her only weapon. She loved toying with men she found far less bright than her. Mercia was a powerful, well-connected woman in the business of silk. She had started with just one shipment imported after family holidays in China. She was, at the time these tragic events took place, the sole owner of a silk empire that stretched throughout the Pacific coast. Mercia had carefully but relentlessly built a web around Jared, pushing him away from his friends and family. It had been a combined effort with her assistant. It was a mix of not passing messages and calls in any direction and presenting plans he couldn't say no to whenever other plans came by. Whenever an argument arose, she would present him with a huge, disproportionate, and often crazy gift. But they weren't Jared's whims, they were hers. She was shaping him little by little into the image of a man she wanted. First, it was a fancy haircut. Then the clothes, the watch, and finally the car. He drove a cabriolet BMW in furious red. Every time he felt anything remotely negative, he would go for a spin in that car, and everything went away. He loved racing the bridge from side to side, watching the sunset over the orange water of the river dividing the city. Slowly but steadily, all of Jared's social connections outside his partner Mercia vanished, and he was left alone with her, vulnerable from many angles. But Jared had more than met the eye, and so did Mercia. Jared was born into a quiet household on the outskirts. He had been moved to a higher grade when he was 9 years old for his skills as a mathematician. His parents never thought any higher of him because of that. His dad was a construction worker, and his mom was a manager at the local petrol station. Both worked second jobs to be able to pay for the education and welfare of their 4 children. There was never much time to talk about anything at home. They were people of action, not intellectuals. They knew how to work hard for a living and make ends meet with blood and sweat, not a single tear. Jared, the youngest of 4, always felt his parents ignored what happened to him. He fought for attention, but all he ever got was a smile and a pat on the back. He was the champion of the state mathematics competition for his school every year, but he was never driven to compete nationally. His parents never had the time, or one of his siblings would play a sports game that same weekend. It all changed with Mercia. She wasn't like the girls he'd hooked up with before. She was the only one who really listened and cared about what happened to him. Jared had always kept his desires and dreams quietly hidden, but once he got together with her, he felt he was awarded the chance, for the first time in his young life, to be himself. That connection, ethereal, magical, it seemed unbreakable, though had a huge crack in its foundations. That crack was beginning to work, and it wasn't going to be long before it ended in tragedy. When Jared told his parents he was moving in with Mercia, they didn't ask who she was or if they could meet her. His mom told him that he was a grown-up now and he couldn't just leave the dirty dishes in the sink, the bed undone, and the clothing around the house. No woman was going to stick with a man like that. She then hugged him and kissed him goodbye on the forehead before rushing out the door to her second job. Life and the extreme effort she was making were taking a toll on her. She looked at least 10 years older and had long, baggy eyes that hung gracelessly, showing how many sleeping hours she had been deprived of. His dad wasn't home and wouldn't come back until almost midnight from his second job. So, off he went into the limousine parked at the suburbs house he grew up in. That journey crossing the bridge above the river from his side of town into the well-off side of town at dusk was movie-like. Jared remembered his old life bit by bit and thought of the future. He had always wanted to cross that bridge in a limo. He had been waiting for that moment all his life. He never imagined the events that followed, though, not even for a second. One morning, after 1 week of sharing her huge house, Jared went down the gigantic marble stairs and found a note that had been slid under the door. He took it and left it on the black, shiny onyx counter with a huge golden vase on top. He was home alone. The windows of the living room let in enough light for him to know that it was another sunny, beautiful day. He went back upstairs with his mom's words inside his head like a mantra and made the bed. Then he prepared his breakfast and did the dishes, leaving everything impeccable. But the envelope kept calling to him from the countertop. He was curious. Did she buy him the ATV as a gift? He put the envelope against the lamp in the living room and read very clearly on top, "Eviction notice." He thought there was something wrong. Disregarded the note entirely and went for a swim. The sun was high and the day was very hot. His girlfriend, concubine, and sugar mommy would take care of it when she got back. 2 days later, the doorbell rang, and Jared opened the door to find a man in a suit and dark shades looking back at him. He asked for Marcia, and since she wasn't home, the man told Jared to tell her she had 1 month, not a minute longer. When Jared asked who the man was representing, he just smiled and said, "Don't worry, kiddo. She knows very well." He told the story to Marcia, and her face changed completely. "Why on earth did you open the door for strangers, Jared? Poor scumbags coming from the kind of neighborhood you come from should know better. For crying out loud, don't you ever do that again." That was the first time Marcia had said such a thing to him, but it wasn't going to be the last. 2 days later, he was a good for nothing, and that she should have left you in the dumpster I found you. Fights were becoming more aggressive. Jared wasn't used to domestic violence. In his house, there was rarely anyone around to fight with. His siblings were almost always away playing some sort of sport, and his parents were working. What Jared had experienced the most as a child was silence. Marcia, on the other hand, became the living version of her father. She made the most incisive, humiliating comments. She was piercing with Jared, hitting him where it hurt most. Jared had no idea Marcia would turn into such a violent woman. Once she gained complete control over Jared, Marcia became a different person completely. She became more controlling, limiting the gas in the BMW and counting his miles when she made it back home. She would get furious if he went for a drive. He was supposed to have the clothes she wanted on when she got home. She said things like, "Aren't you a spoiled brat? Look at you," and then kissed him with a big hug, rushing him into the room. He began feeling suffocated, angry, but broken. The one person in the world who heard him, to whom he could open, was behaving as a cold, aggressive enemy. He thought about leaving her in the house and everything else behind, but where would he go? Back home to the suburbs and an absent family? He had become a stranger to his friends and was ashamed of going back as if nothing had happened. He was alone and trapped at Marcia's expert web. That moment, to shake his bad thoughts, he went for a swim, but with a strange feeling. Something bad was happening. He had been watching a whole different movie. The characters were revealing a second nature, a different face. Life was telling him there was something he had overlooked. As soon as he left the pool and went to the back of the house, he noticed Marcia's watch on a bench. As soon as he looked up, he was horrified to find her lifeless body hanging from the tree above. Her skin had gone blue and she was barely dressed. He fell to the floor, crawled back, and ran to the house to call 911. He was sobbing through the whole conversation and was kept on the phone until the patrol and the paramedics arrived at the scene. Detective Martinez was assigned to the case. The first thing that the detective discovered was that Marcia was completely broke. Her company had been avoiding bankruptcy, but her personal spending was sinking the boat fast. She owed more than she had, and the company wasn't making enough money for her to sustain the lifestyle. Both husbands had gone away with a thick slice of her earnings. She was an only child and an orphan. One lead for the police was suicide, but the option of murder couldn't be dismissed. Jared was called to declare. Being her sugar baby, he was not only a suspect, but he also had a very poor alibi. He stated he was sleeping upstairs and didn't hear a thing. Detective Martinez explained to him that the papers that Marcia had made him sign and were found in the house, along with the notices for eviction, said that she transferred all debt to him. That included the house and the business. Maybe he found out about this and killed her for revenge, Detective Martinez thought at the time. He denied any involvement in the death of Marcia and looked very shocked when he was told the bad news. His jaw dropped and his eyes filled with soon-to-be tears. All Jared could think about at the time was his parents. They had made such an effort all their life. And just when he thought he was going to be able to help them, it was only sinking them into more debt. All witnesses confirmed the romance between Marcia and Jared, and the house personnel informed the police about the rising violence between them. Jared became the main suspect in the cause, and in the media echoed the police leads. No evidence confirmed that Jared had killed Marcia, though. He couldn't be arrested. The key moment for the investigation was when they found trails of a motorcycle behind the house. They belonged to a Honda XR. They followed the trail and found it incinerated at the river's shore. The license plate was still legible. The police used that to find it was registered under Simon Arthur, a known hitman working for the big fish in town who lent money at astronomical rates, no questions asked. Marcia, in a desperate attempt to save her lifestyle and company, was given a very large amount of money by the lender, with her house as a guarantee of payment. She didn't pay back or give them the house, so they sent Simon Arthur to fake her suicide. The intricate web of a big mafia organization operating in the expensive side of town was uncovered, and a long investigation followed her crime. As for Jared, he was declared not guilty, and his mathematical genius allowed him to find the financial holes in Marcia's company. His company after signing the papers. He was able to create an effective, efficient plan to make it productive again. Over time, he was able to repay Marcia's debts, keep the house, and expand the empire well into Mexico and Canada. He moved his parents with him to a big house and supported the entire family. His became a story of resilience, talent, and perseverance. Marcia's death became a warning for the community about the dark places where ambition, unhealed wounds, and greed can take us.